are invitational. The decision's a 3-0 for the negative from 15 minutes left. I'll go first, I guess. I end up voting off the negative case. I actually think the door is open, at least for me, for a 2AR win. I don't think you're doing enough on either the skepticism argument or the argument about why you wouldn't be killing and why that would trigger permissibility for me. So the way that I evaluate the framework debate is that regardless of what's happening on column 2 or this argument about the presupposition, even if you're right that you link in, or the argument about the infinite regress, you overlook the second piece of comparative analysis that Daniel does between the frameworks, that they're pre-contractual norms. So if I end up evaluating an ethical framework, I look to the negative framework. The reason that I don't vote off the skepticism argument is that I think Daniel is correct in his claim that gets conceded that you're just appealing to some like morality as a guide for action argument, which is not an initially justified premise. I think that's true when I call for the argument that you're making a lot of arguments that appeal to why morality would not function, but not really establishing why it has to function in that way. Minimally, I think you need to be responding to that implication, given that this is a pretty short argument and not where the argument is. I'm fine voting for it if it's one. I just think you need to be doing a good job of answering this argument about why it's not justified. So in that case, I look to the negative case. I think you're wrong in your assertion about what Daniel's argument is at the very end. I think, Daniel, you should be doing more here to establish why you can't just go for one option and why it doesn't have to be an absolute prohibition. But Tom, his argument isn't that it's an absolute prohibition on killing. It's just that there's no reason why he has to prove an absolute prohibition of any kind. So you might be right that there are instances in which you don't kill because deadly force would just cause a grave injury. But I think you're misconstruing his argument. His argument is that in the instances when people do die, that would still be sufficient to negate because one instance of a permissibility is not enough to affirm. Do you understand what I mean? There's a conflation of the term absolute prohibition on killing, which Daniel is talking about in the negative case, and then the burden's interpretation of whether he has to prove an absolute prohibition on the affirmative case. Daniel's argument in the NC is that there is an absolute prohibition on killing. His argument about the burdens is that he does not have to prove an absolute prohibition on the affirmative. Right? It's a comparative. Well, I think that's where the weakness is. I don't think there's much of a warrant, but I also don't think there's much of a warrant for why you should only have to prove one instance. So given that I just have to choose one, I think that Daniel's is a more reasonable view and is more consistent with the debate until the 2NR, or until like 5 seconds of the 1AR that seems tangentially related to the rest. Like, I think this is where you could win because I don't think he does a good job establishing why it's not a absolute prohibition. And if you give 2 or 3 good reasons why it would have to be, I'd probably end up affirming off this argument. But because there isn't comparative analysis done, I have to pick one. I feel like Daniel's is a more consistent view with the rest of the round. So from there, the way that I vote is I probably vote off some argument of Sartre and Camus. I think that there are 2 problems with your turn about reasserting ourselves. Is that Daniel's right about the Camus cross application, that you can't really, you can't obtain the truth through this reassertion. You're still appealing to the negative framework because there's no external check on whether you're going to be reasserting yourself correctly because you'll be acting impulsively. You're the judge, jury, and executioner. And then the second argument is that I think Sartre might even deny this by saying you can't know what you're supposed to be asserting yourself as to find this truth if you're still killing the other people because that relationship is important. So I vote off the negative offense.
I largely agree with Stephen. I think you're losing House block, and the only argument that really I feel would get you out of having to deal with the NC would be this enforcement argument. My problem with it is that it's very underdeveloped in the AC, and even in the 1AR, like on my flow, it's just not developed enough for me to reject the entire position. So when I look at the negative, this deadly force argument you're making about how it doesn't kill the abuser, I think it's very defensive, and it needs to have more of an offensive implication as you're reading the AR. And I feel in light of not, he's winning overwhelmingly, he's winning, links back to the negative standards. So it would be much harder, I guess, to, say that you win this argument, therefore reject the negative case, rather than just say, well, I agree that maybe in some cases, people don't die, there are cases where people do die, and that's bad under the framework, so I would engage. So that's how I vote.
I have almost nothing to add. The two things I'll add very quickly is to say, first, I think I agree as well that that we're losing the enforcement argument, but I think the religion argument is the reason why. So I don't even have to get to the second argument that Stephen is evaluating here, because the rhetoric in the 1AC is just to say enforcement happens, and it normally happens through the process of governments, right? And he's saying, well, we can have enforcement through other mechanisms. We don't need that physical existence. I don't understand what it is about his system that uniquely can't enforce, that your system can't enforce, that means that triggers skepticism. I think that's too far of a leap. And then I think in regard to the absolute prohibition stuff, you just need to be doing more of an explanation of what how this prohibition argument functions. So an extension of the definition, for example, or explaining how that works. You just say, I say it's for the prohibition, he doesn't prove the prohibition, that's it. So when he gets up and just says, look, we're looking at two categories of actions, and his argument is that because any of those instances might result in death, we have to prohibit them across the board. I think that argument is sufficient, given that you really don't give any.
Okay.
Very.